Being a trucker is by no means an easy feat. Through the windshield of life they see a lot, some of which can be downright terrifying. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. My uncle was a truck driver for many years. He doesn't share a lot of stories, but he told me this one night, whilst we were drinking beer. He spent several years doing cross-country trips, often loading up his trailer in the middle of the night. While he waited for his trailer to be loaded, he'd make his way over to a nearby truck stop, have a late-night meal, and shoot the shit with any other drivers there. After a while, he would make friends with drivers that were on a somewhat similar schedule. He befriended this particular guy that he would run into about once a month or so. He said this guy was massive, a huge guy. My uncle is kind of a wise ass that can get annoying really quickly. He said this was one guy he knew that when he crossed the line and agitated him, it was time to go. Anyway, he runs into this guy every so often, and they shoot the shit and kill time while their semi-trucks are getting loaded up. One night, the guy invites him back into his semi. He wants to show him something that he built there in his semi. This guy's semi has a sleeper on the back, so it's pretty big. Basically, it's a semi-truck with a small room right behind the driver to sleep in. My uncle is intrigued by seeing what kind of custom work this guy has done in his semi, so he goes along with him. Once there, in the truck, the guy shows him what he's built in the sleeper of his semi. It's a big, heavy-duty box. Apparently it has hydraulic arms on either side, so he can open and close it with the push of a button. He says that once he's pushed the button, it seals shut and can no longer be opened. My uncle is kind of weirded out by this, but cracks a few jokes about the box. The guy then starts to get a little bit agitated, and my uncle realized this and decided it's time to leave this guy's semi. A few months later, he found out that this guy was a serial killer, stuffing truck stop hookers and others into this custom hydraulic box. At this point in the story, his hand starts shaking and he can barely drink his beer. That guy was massive, he says. His hand could cover most of my head. He could have stuffed me in that box, and there was nothing I could have done to stop him. Or shit, maybe someone was in there already. He said he still had nightmares about it years later, and after some research, I suspect it was the notorious serial killer, Keith Jesperson. Number 2. About 17 years ago, my dad was a baitfish hauler who made runs from Arkansas to the Northeast and Midwest. At one point, whilst he was in Ohio, traffic came to a dead halt. Accident right up ahead of him. A car had been barreling down the highway and drove right underneath a truck and hit the dot bar. Dad noticed the smoke and figured it meant a fire was starting up, so he jumped out and ran up to the back of the truck, where a bunch of other truckers and some drivers were. An engine fire was indeed starting, and there were 2 kids in the back seat of the car, really disoriented from the impact, The back passenger window was too small in the car for them to smash it open and get the kids out, so they had to go through the front passenger window. Dad was the only one with a small enough frame of the group and willing enough to climb inside. So he did. Unfortunately, the driver was too stupid and hadn't been wearing a seatbelt. He'd been decapitated, and his body was laying over the passenger seat. So my dad had to climb over him, between the two front seats, and pull two kids who were basically deadweight. He managed to do so. The car was mostly engulfed in flames about 15 minutes later. They handed the kids off to an elderly couple, who took them back to their car and cleaned the blood off them and gave them some sandwiches that they'd packed. State troopers were there a while later, took statements and all of that from everyone. The state boys went back and checked on the kids. They were mostly fine, just a little shaken up. The oldest one was a little girl, and Dad had to chuckle at one point when the little girl said, "Mama's gonna be real mad at Daddy this time." Made him wonder what other bonehead moves this dude had done in the past. I remember when Dad came home after the run, he had a styrofoam ice chest with him that had his clothes in ice water. Those clothes had been absolutely drenched in blood. Luckily, all came out in the wash, which was good with him because it was his favourite pair of jeans. Number 3. I'm not a trucker, but a dispatcher. However, this story is about a trucker. We had a driver who had, shall we say, an odour problem. I'm not talking like body odour sweat. I'm talking about stale urine. Any time he'd come to the dispatch office, it was a race to get him to leave again. The kind of putrid tang that would make you gag immediately and completely involuntarily, regardless of your best efforts. Driver was a rather heavy-set guy, nice enough, but a little slow. We let it go until we started getting complaints from customers about the smell. Now this driver was a flatbed driver, meaning most of his deliveries were onto construction sites, job sites, steel and lumber mills. 90% of deliveries were outdoors, and in the company of rough and tough dudes, who otherwise wouldn't give a damn what you smelt like, we'd still get a couple of phone calls a week from different foremen saying that they wouldn't take this guy onto their site anymore because the odours were so terrible and severely affected his workers. We started delicately attempting to bring it up, trying to urge proper hygiene, etc. He claimed that he showered every day, or every other day at worst, and that it was just what he smelt like, and has always had the problem for as long as he could remember. Nothing he could do. Okay, now here is where things get interesting. At some point, he had to bring his truck in for maintenance. It was a company truck. He did not own it. But we didn't rotate trucks, so he'd had the same one for months. Something had to be checked in the gear shift, so the mechanic had to go inside the truck. Upon climbing into the cab, the mechanic promptly did a 180 and puked out the driver's side door. It was then that the big piss bucket was discovered. I'm not talking like a Gatorade bottle or something like that. I'm talking like a job site shop bucket, filled nearly to the top with urine. The floor was wet around it, indicating that some had splashed out. I'm told that the inside of the cabin smelled 10 times worse than he did. It was basically pure concentrated evil, and the walls of the cabin had a slight yellow-brown dull sheen. We fired the driver, using the complaints from customers as the excuse, and then parked the truck outside in our yard. Doors and windows were opened for a week just to try and dull the smell. Then had a guy with a ghetto pieced together hazmat type suit, rubber gloves, rubber boots, mask, rain slicker, etc. go in and basically douse the whole thing in bleach. No matter what they did, no matter how hard they cleaned it, they could not get rid of the smell. That truck sat outside in our yard for a full year, windows and doors standing wide open. Rain, snow, blustery winds, it just sat wide open to the elements. One day, a year later, the boss decided to close it up and see how it was. Just as bad as the day they tried to clean it was the answer. He decided to scrap the truck 1 week later. Number 4. Around 2007, I was a trucker, and it was around 2:30 in the morning in Georgia. I was in the sticks about 100 miles north of Atlanta, on an I-75, and I was alone in a drop yard for trailers. I was there to drop off my current trailer and hook another one. All I had to do was go to pick up my paperwork from the mailbox and go. I loved shit like this. No bullshit, load is ready for me to pick up, and no waiting around. Great. Now, my entire life, there has been this weird phenomenon that has followed me. You know those halogen street lights? I would say about 60 to 70% of those lights I walked under would go dark. It's the strangest thing. If I walk down a street at night, it's not strange at all if every light I walk under goes out. And when I walk away from it, it comes back on. I walk the streets in darkness. I have no idea why it happens. Anyway, I've dropped my first trailer, backed under the trailer, I'm picking up, got my paperwork, and I'm raising the landing gear. I'm standing under a big street light, and guess what? It goes out. No big deal. But I say out loud, to no one in particular, I wonder why that always happens. And at that point, the craziest thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life happened. A calm voice from about 3 feet away said, "Show of respect." A voice. No one was around for miles. I was out in the middle of nowhere, and there was no one. I heard it plain as day. It was a man's voice. It wasn't loud, scary, nor intimidating. It spoke, very matter-of-factly. Show of respect. I freaked out, jumped into the truck, and moved 80,000 pounds faster than I ever thought I could move it. I'm not crazy. I have never had a mental illness, and there is no history of mental illness in my family. I just wish I knew what it meant. Number 5. As a man that has reached the ripe old age of 48, I can promise you I have seen some shit go down. This one totally takes the cake for me though. I was waiting out front of a truck stop back in the mid-80s, sitting on a park bench with a guy that had a big Rottweiler kind of dog on a leash with him. I tried to make small talk, but he was quite a sourpuss. So we sat there in silence for a few minutes, until the most unexpected thing I had ever seen happened right before my eyes. Whilst we were sitting there, a big 18-wheeler pulls in without a trailer. So he parks right up front like a normal car would. Inside the cab of the truck, with the driver, is a little monkey. The dance for the organ grinder kind. I think they're called rhesus monkeys perhaps. Well, the dog spots this little monkey and proceeds to go apeshit over it, lunging at the end of his leash and barking at the top of his lungs, generally making a real spectacle of himself to say the least. The driver is obviously upset, but not nearly as much as the monkey is. Actually, upset may be the wrong adjective to use for the monkey though. In retrospect, I think eagerly aggressive may be a more appropriate description for his disposition. He was pacing the dashboard back and forth, never taking his eyes off this very aggravating dog. The driver opens his little triangle window that they don't make on cars anymore, the ones made for smokers back in the day. He yells out to the douchebag to call his dog off because it's upsetting his monkey. The guy laughs and says no way, and proceeds to say that the dog isn't bothering anyone. The dog hasn't shut up since he laid eyes on the monkey, and I promise you he is bothering everyone for several blocks around. Now, here's where things start to get interesting. The driver says that if he doesn't call off his dog, he's gonna let the monkey loose on the dog. The douchebag laughs and says that his dog would eat the monkey alive. Upon hearing this, the driver leans over and reaches into his glove box, pulls out one of those tiny baseball bats, like you used to get at Astroworld or in carnivals, and places it in the monkey's hand. The monkey obviously knows what is about to go down, because he is now trying to squeeze out of that little triangular window as I mentioned earlier. This monkey has murder in his eyes if I've ever seen it. The driver hollers, "Last chance to save your dog's ass, man." In response, douchebag lets his dog off the leash. Now we have a situation that has escalated to the point where we have a dog jumping up at a window and a monkey screaming profanities right back at him, while the driver finally rolls down the regular window and out leaps all kinds of miniature primate hell. The dog never knew what hit him. Quick as a flash, this monkey is riding on the back of the dog's neck. His two back feet are all wrapped up around the neck fur, with one hand around the ear. The other hand, as you may have guessed, is now steadily and mercilessly raining down blows on this dog's head and face. And I mean hard blows. You can really hear them. Well, it only took a moment for the dog to realize that it was way in over its head. He bolts, yelping bloody murder as he runs away full speed. I mean, this dog is running so hard that he's throwing up tufts of grass and dirt as soon as he leaves the pavement. The monkey's still riding him and beating him the whole time. Douchebag acts like he wants a fight now, but several people, including myself, step in to stop that nonsense. In a couple of minutes or so, the little monkey comes looping back, with his little bat still in hand, and leaps up to the open window of the truck to await his master who has gone into the store. The douchebag ran off to try and find his dog, but I don't know if he ever did. My ride showed up, and I had to go. Nevertheless, never again in this lifetime will I see something so totally crazy and unexpected like that. I am both fortunate and humbled to have been privileged to be present for such an event. This happened to my father. A few years ago, he was driving a road train here in Queensland, Australia. It was him and 3 other road trains, I think, and he was second in line. For anyone wondering what a road train is, imagine an old-looking, generally all-around gargantuan-sized semi-truck, hauling 3, sometimes 4, normal-sized trailers at the same time. Yeah, hauling that much stuff, of course, is not going to be able to stop as fast as your 1994 Honda Civic. Anyway, some guy tried to overtake all of them before the overtaking lane ended. This lane isn't very long, about 1 kilometer, and they are few and far between along this road, which the guy obviously knew. Now, this guy had ran out of room by the time he had gotten to the truck at the front, and so he went off the road and rolled his car. The trucks all stopped, and my father got out and ran towards the car, which was by now on fire. The first driver was much closer to the car than my father was, due to these trucks being a good 100 meters long. When Dad got there, the truck driver just had his hands in the air, saying, "Nope, I can't handle this." What he had seen was the man, still conscious, flailing about in the car burning alive. Dad didn't want to see something so horrid, so he didn't look, but he is still haunted by the fact that a man was alive only 1 minute ago driving past him, but then, 1 minute later, he was burning alive in a car ahead. The truck driver is basically a basket case today. He still can't get over it and feels terrible, but it is by no means his fault. Driving back from a road trip, someone tried overtaking my father again on the same stretch of road, not 2 kilometers away from the night before. There were police up ahead, and the guy was up to about 200 kilometers an hour just to get ahead of my dad before the lane ended. So he slams on the brakes just before he can get seen by the coppers. And Dad says he barely braked in time to not send him flying ahead, due to the road trains having a much harder time braking than any car does. They get pulled over, and my dad abused the hell out of this guy because he was still upset about the night before, and he sure as hell didn't want to see that shit again. And the guy acted like he had no idea what he did. I have never seen my dad afraid, but I could see in his eyes just how scared he was when he told me this, because that moment terrified him so much that he could have been the guy to take another man's life so quickly. I hope you people can understand that trucks, especially road trains, do not have the same capabilities as cars, and you should know how to act around them and know how they work. Number 7. My mother is a trucker, and this is her story. She was driving through Arizona when she saw what she thought were leaves blowing across the road in the distance. This puzzled her, since there's mostly pine trees in northern Arizona. When she finally got to the leaves, she realized that they were migrating tarantulas. Thousands of them. There were so many of them that her truck was sliding on their guts, so she had to slow down. She stopped at the first truck stop and told her co-driver to fuel up, as he was sleeping at the time, because she was not going to step foot outside after what she'd just seen. Her co-driver was pissed, since it was technically his time off, and he thought she was going crazy, until he saw the tarantula guts and legs caked in the inside wheel of the truck. She also outran a tornado in the Midwest. She was about to pull over and take cover until she saw another big rig that was parked on the side of the road get tossed a couple of 100 yards away like a toy. She called me and told me that she thought she was going to die and wanted her last words to be "I love you" to me. She pulled off the freeway and got to a Walmart where she ran into the basement where all the staff and customers were taking shelter. After the tornado passed, they stepped out of the basement into daylight, since the Walmart was destroyed. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I have a massive respect for truckers. Driving for such a long period of time is exhausting. So if you're a trucker, much love. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider dropping a like and leaving a comment. It would really help me out. Thanks guys. And if you want me to read your story on my channel, you can submit it as a text post to Reddit, or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. And if you would like to do something truly amazing today to help support the channel, you now can, via Patreon. You can find the link in the description, as well as the links to my social media. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.